Yeah. I'm Adrian Finney. I used to be a primary school teacher. I now write books about the paranormal, weird local histories, all that kind of thing. As well, I'm also the guy who does Sheffield's Ghost Walks. See dozens and dozens of pairs of eyes just staring out at them, nothing else, just these eyes just floating like in the hedges either side of the road, just gazing and looking in. Strangeways was built in 1868. It's originally only meant to house 1,200 prisoners, but that quickly doubled and tripled. It's got more than that even in there now, even though they've not substantially changed it. And right from the start, it was one of only 2 prisons in England that had a permanent gallows set up in the basement. Most other prisoners, when people were being hung back then, the hangman would just carry it around by a horse and cart, carry the gallows around the country to wherever it was needed. But Strangeways had one all ready to go.
Strangeways has always had a reputation for being one of the harshest and most brutal prisons in the country, especially for its executions. In the early 20th century, conditions at the prison were notorious for squalor and overcrowding. In 1990, the certified population for the prison was 970 people, and on the 1st of April in the very same year, it was 1,647.
The security guards were there doing the rounds, and they saw down the end of this corridor what looked to be a bald man with a very, very distinctive moustache. So they were chasing after him because they thought he must be a lawyer coming visiting a defendant, say, or somebody in the cells, and he got lost. They couldn't find him, so they rang the alarm, did a full search of the prison, and they couldn't find anyone to find who could match that description. This kept happening over and over again, and it was always the same description. So one of the most senior guards at the time, he decided that he'd look into this a bit more forensically. He had the idea of talking to everybody who'd seen this guy or walking around and sending them to a police sketch artist friend he'd got, who did a composite drawing, and he was quite shocked because the face he saw staring back at him was one that he remembered from about 50 years back when he first started working, and that was of a hangman called John Ellis.
Between 1901 and 1924, John Ellis was the UK Chief's executioner, conducting the executions of more than 200 prisoners. Ellis ended up committing suicide in his late life, and some people believe this was because of the execution of Edith Thompson, someone who was found innocent after Ellis had executed her. The next location I visited is just a few miles north of the city and is home to an urban legend, the Bogart Man. This place, which roughly covers 170 acres of land, is supposedly home to a supernatural spectre that can turn milk sour, make objects disappear, and dogs unable to walk. When I went to investigate this location, I actually got speaking to a few dog walkers. When asked about the history and if their dogs have ever acted weird in the park, a few walkers became quite uncomfortable with the topic and quickly told me that they will never let their dog off the lead in this park and warned me not to stay after sundown. And as you can see, that's exactly what I did. After spending a few hours after dark, I wasn't finding anything out of the ordinary until the time hit 11 PM. Before this, the park was very calm and quiet. So I thought I'd test out the legend and say Mr. Bogart out loud, and I probably should not have done this. The wind picked up out of nowhere and the geese in the pond started screaming as the temperatures became very cold. At this point I knew my stay was not welcome anymore, and I did make my way back to the car. After experiencing this, it really made me question whether it was just circumstantial that nature decided to go wild straight after I said what I was told not to say, or whether this was actually the work of an evil spirit. I did actually take some footage of me stood in this park speaking, and behind me on the camera there was a weird flashing light that was not there in real life, but unfortunately the file kept corrupting when trying to add it to this documentary.
Yeah, Manchester's Palace Theatre was built in 1891. It's one of the grandest theatres in the country. When it was originally built, unbelievably, it had a capacity of almost 4,000. Double what it is now, and you can't, even now it feels cramped. You can't imagine cramming 4,000 people in there. and it's always had this like welcoming atmosphere. People who work there say it's more like being part of a family than it is being like just doing a job.
Palace Theatre was originally built in 1891 with construction costing just over 40 grand. This would amount to around 5 million in today's money. The original capacity of the venue was much larger than it is today, accommodating just below 4,000 people.
There was a young girl who started there when it opened in the 1890s. Her name was Edith. She was 14 on opening night and she worked as an usherette, and she spent her entire working career at that theatre. She absolutely loved it there. She worked through various jobs, front of house, backstage, and eventually she ended up as a cleaner. And 49 years later she was still working there in 1940, and she was loving the job. There were just not really any shows on because the war was on, but they're still keeping skeletal cleaning staff, just keeping it ready to go because they knew the war wouldn't last forever. And that was when Manchester was being bombed quite heavily during the Second World War, and sadly poor Edith lost her life. She was cleaning the upstairs women's toilets at the time. A bomb came down, hit the top of the building, and there was a collapse. Unfortunately it pinned Edith and she wasn't killed instantly. She would have been there a couple of hours, they think, when they got the coroner's report, and then the second bomb hit, which would have killed her outright. So she had a really, really traumatic end-of-life experience.
Edith worked at the theatre and had done since her early youthful life, as an usherette all the way up into her 60s when she was a cleaner. Edith became quite popular with the stars who appeared in shows there. She actually once received a Christmas card from Noel Coward. Edith now seems to remain trapped at the venue.
Edith used to do a very distinctive thing when she'd walk around, especially cleaning. If it was after hours, she'd whistle to herself or she'd hum to herself. And people started hearing this whistle and this hum and go, "Oh, it's Edith." And then they'd realise it can't be Edith. But they swore blind, they could hear it, and they could sort of like sense there was somebody there. And it was always a really friendly, lovely presence that was felt. It was like she was still doing the rounds. And she's still, even recently, people are still coming across. It's more of a sense that there's somebody there, and that the faint like hum and whistle.
One location I visited that left me with a really uneasy feeling was Angel Meadows. The name of the place originates from the fact that there are 40,000 bodies buried beneath the surface. The garden was once described as hell on earth by Friedrich Engels in one of the most socially influent texts ever written. The death rate here was so high due to the simple fact that the area, because of the so highly dense population, was riddled with crime and disease. Over 30,000 people lived in squalor, and it's rumoured that cockroaches were actually people's friends because they would eat the bedbugs. In this area at the time, death rate rose to 175% of the national average. I managed to capture this moment. A crow walked across the land just right above where all the bodies are buried. The feeling of death just overrides anything here. The reason so many bodies are buried here was because many people just could not afford a proper burial. All the bodies would get brought down from town and shoved into this tiny garden. Even when gates were put up to stop people from bringing more bodies, people would sling them over the fence.
Mayfield station is in the heart of Manchester. It was originally built to relieve capacity at the very, very overcrowded London Road station, which is now known as Manchester Piccadilly, and it clearly didn't take off as an idea very well, because Manchester Piccadilly is still an insanely busy station. But right from when it was first opened, it kind of always had this seedy reputation. It was the disreputable side of town. It was the wrong side of the tracks, if you will. And it also got this interesting reputation for that was the place where you go to commit suicide. It had this dark reputation thing going on. One such person who survived a suicide attempt says it was the most horrifying experience of their lives because they felt like a passenger. They felt like somebody had entered their body, and the way they go is they climb up to the roof and then throw themselves off the roof, which is not a good way to go. But they said that they could see their body doing all of the actions, they could feel their body climbing up, but they were just screaming, stop, stop, stop. They weren't in control. And there's a few other people with the same kind of thing, and because of this weirdness and this unsettling, like, you've got that reputation, people didn't like to use Fairfield very much if they could help it. It was like they knew to avoid it. So in the 1960, London Road renamed itself to Manchester Piccadilly, and Fairfield was closed down to public. It stayed open as a Royal Mail depot for years, and post trains were going in up until the end of the 1980s. But back then, there were just parts of the station that they just stopped and wouldn't let anybody in because people were feeling these dark presences taking over them there. And then come the end of the 1980s, it closed down, and we're going to redevelop this, we're going to make it into this, we're going to make it into that. And we've had 30 odd years of that now. And it's like there's something there telling people they don't want people there, telling people to go away. It's weird because it must be such a valuable piece of land right in the heart of Manchester.
When visiting this location, I found it incredibly eerie, especially at the point where people used to commit suicide. The top floor is the only floor that's not done up and it's left to rot. When speaking to people who regularly visit this location, they told me of stories about how they feel the location inside changes. Sometimes it feels like a really long walkway, and other times it feels like it's really short. I spoke to Adrian on his thoughts about this.
They call it high strangeness, and it's like we perceive time differently, we perceive things differently, and maybe that's what's going on with all of these events. Rather than them being maybe a real manifestation of a ghost or something, there's something environmental triggering something in our brain to process things differently, and that's why people are seeing these things over and over at the same places. It's something more psychological than paranormal, maybe.
The next part of my journey took me all the way to Amsterdam, and I've been hoping to catch something on camera all this documentary, and I haven't done it yet, and this is why I travelled all the way here to try and find something. And in this case, I got a little bit more than what I was asking for. Hotel Arena, which was built in 1886, used to be a women's hospital and a Catholic girls' orphanage. It was administered by a charity that cared for poor and vulnerable women in society because there was no welfare state in those days. Orphans that ended up here were usually extremely unwanted or extremely sick, and will have seen death inside these walls. And that's exactly what I picked up when we first walked into this room. This room smell of death, that's the only way I can put it. So as you can see, we've made ourselves quite at home. In the room, it's a nice room. It is really cosy in here. So one thing to mention was we were in the attic room for this, and it was confirmed by hotel staff there was no one above us. So we jumped into the first night. We are in the attic room, as you can see here, the slants in the ceiling. We are on the top floor, there's no one above us, and we have been hearing a lot of activity going on upstairs, which has really been creeping us out. We've been live watching TV and you'll hear thuds, like someone's scraping, moving boxes above us. And this wasn't going to be the only thing that caught our attention on our stay. So it's currently 3 AM, about 20 minutes ago. We were just woken up by the fire alarm in our room. We've been outside to check if people were going outside, obviously, to evacuate. And when we went outside, the sound just stopped and no one else was coming out of the rooms. We're going to go down tomorrow and ask the reception staff why it went off. We didn't film when the fire alarm was going off because I genuinely thought it was just one of them where everyone was going to have to go outside. But after speaking to hotel staff the day after, they assured us that our room fire alarm had not gone off. I would definitely want to do something like this again, but I think next time, I don't think I've got what I wanted coming from here. I came here thinking it's going to be really haunted, and maybe it might have been a little bit more exciting, but it's been quite a chilled experience, just with a touch of odd little things happening there and there. But I definitely want to go to a place with some more gruesome history.
They've swore blind, their friends have seen it. I've now, with researching, found hundreds of people who claim to have seen this. And it's said to be, if you're walking down Platt Lane about 7:45 in the morning, usually in December, so when it's not quite light yet, the light's just starting to lighten up, people see dozens and dozens of pairs of eyes just staring out at them, nothing else, just these eyes just floating like in the hedges either side of the road, just gazing and looking in. And they're said to be overcome with this like absolutely all-encompassing sense of sadness just comes over them, and they're just staring there and just staring, which is weird, and it's really unsettling. I came to visit this place, and just like Adrian, I hadn't seen anything with my own eyes, but the sense and feeling you get from coming down this place, it is the sense of sadness and eeriness, and it was quite creepy. It's a weird bit of road, even if you don't see anything. There is like a sense of desolation and sadness there that it's kind of hard to put down or put into words unless you've actually experienced it. So if we look back into the history of the area, we can kind of find an explanation as to what could happen, because one of the worst mining disasters in history happened at the nearby Pretoria pits on the Wednesday 21st of December, so right before Christmas 1910, and over 350 people died in, I think it's the second worst in British history, and it's still up there in top 10 in worldwide history mining disasters. What happened was they hadn't properly cleared the mines off the night before, so 2,500 people went down into the mines that morning, because there were 5 mines coming off a main central shaft, and one of them exploded because there was a build-up of coal gas from the day before, and in that over 350 people died. But of the rescue crew, almost none of them died, through injuries or through fire, through pit collapse. Only 2 or 3 people died that way. The rest died of instant asphyxiation. As it exploded, it drew in all the oxygen from the mine, and they just couldn't breathe and just collapsed. There's all this, like you find newspaper reports at the time of the rescue crew who sent down there, just saying it was all of these open eyes just staring back out, and it's the exact same thing being described, but they're describing the bodies they're recovering from the pit, because they all just died with that shocked look, open-eyed look on their face. And obviously being down in the pit when it's dirty, it was just the white eyes with nothing else you could see, because the rest was covered with coal dust. And I found that a bit unsettling, that you find in this old newspaper describing exactly the same thing. It's like, oh, okay. And when you go to Platt Lane, it would have happened about 400 to 500 metres directly below you is where everyone died. So